think it is possible to control this particular pathogen, and it can be very rewarding. It's not always easy and does certainly require some effort and some time and really choosing a good partner to really help you develop that tool. But certainly worth it.
Hello, and welcome to the Swine podcast show. I'm Dr. Tara Donovan, your host, and today I have two guests on my show. First, Dr. Seth Krantz. Seth is a veterinarian with Tosh Farms in Henry, Tennessee. And I have as a return guest, Dr. Steve Tousignant. Steve is the head of the Swine business unit with Vaxxinova. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Great. So today we're going to continue a conversation we've been having around Strep suis and how to diagnose and manage the disease in your herd. And if you haven't tuned in, we have a previous podcast with Dr. Tom Petznick with his experience with the strep bug in his farm. So be sure to visit that episode on your podcast platform. Before we jump in about more strep, I'd like to invite our guests to just introduce themselves a little bit more to our audience. Seth?
Yeah, thanks, Tara. It's good to talk about strep, although I guess I'd rather not talk about strep. But so I've been a veterinarian with Tosh Farms for about 13 years now. Spent a couple of years before that in a swine practice up in the Midwest, but have been here ever since. Enjoy raising pigs in Tennessee and Kentucky.
Great. Well, thanks for being on our show. Steve?
Yeah, thanks, Tara. My name is Steve Tousignant. I'm the director of the Swine business unit at Vaxxinova. I've been with the company for about 3 years now and happy to be here, talking about strep.
So let's jump into Strep suis and how to combat it in your herd. So Seth, just jump in and tell us about what you experienced, what you saw in terms of the disease process, and then we'll kind of go on to how you worked on calming that down.
Yeah, so I think for most producers and veterinarians, strep is not an uncommon foe that we have to deal with. And really, my biggest struggles came after we did a genetic change for sourcing for one of our multiplier herds. And then we started to see really significant strep challenge in downstream pigs. And these were high health sows, no PRRS, no myco, none of the real big problems. But significant mortality, some of the highest mortality post-weaning of all of our flows. So about triple our normal expected mortality. In repeated diagnostics, it would just be purely strep. No other bacteria, no other viral players in there. Beautiful pigs just getting down, neurologic or sudden death pigs. So it was a real challenge for us.
Why risk it? Your herd may have antigenic gaps that are not being covered by the products currently available. Custom-made vaccines provide a unique advantage in that they can be formulated to a herd's specific bacterial and viral needs. Choose the exact isolates, adjuvant, packaging, and size you need with Vaxxinova for a vaccine formulated to your needs. Find out more by visiting us at vaxxinova.us.com. That's VAXXINOVA.us.com.
So really quick before we dig into how you, go in and start to get an isolate and perhaps look at how you can control it, let's talk a little bit about kind of where that strep came from. So it's interesting that you have a relatively clean herd with PRRS and myco, kind of the big players, but you're still having, a disease process. And so just for our audience a little bit, how does a healthy, normal pig that's coming in as a gilt bring strep, right? So just touch on that just a little bit on that genetic piece, right? Because that's a little bit new to, doing this genetic profiling, at least for us as veterinarians. Those tools are relatively new. And so how do you differentiate that?
Yeah, so I guess what I've learned, and I should put a disclaimer that I'm no strep expert by any means, but certainly we have kind of, our normal pathogens that over time we develop a lot of herd immunity to. And really just a change in gilt sourcing really brought some new players into the game that we hadn't had before. And I've really always considered that the sow and probably that gilt is really the primary transmission pathway to those pigs. In this particular situation, these pigs were single sourced, not being commingled with other pigs, and just being destroyed by strep suis.
Yeah, great. So strep is one of those bugs for us that, you kind of expect there to be changes from one herd to another, right? That's an underlying kind of microflora. And so, yeah, I think that's a challenge because you think everything's going to go great and you maybe cleaned up another disease, but here comes this one. So tell us what happened then when you told us what you're experiencing with the pigs. What'd you do next?
Yeah, so, really I was looking for a solution primarily. I wasn't really going down the path of trying to eliminate strep. I think that's a whole nother discussion, an interesting discussion, but not where I was at the time. And so really when I would find these pigs, very clinical textbook strep kind of cases, I would submit diagnostics, and we'd find an isolate. But what we learned was, and I wanted to go down the route of, an autogenous vaccine to help control it. And we would put that isolate in the vaccine, and I was underwhelmed by the control that I got from that. And so really then we went down a path of extensive diagnostic testing. And what I found was, a single pig or two, getting your routine samples, you would get an isolate, but it may not be the right one. I think these really pathogenic streps are harder to isolate. They certainly get overgrown by some of the more commensal or less pathogenic streps. So really it took, many pig, maybe 10 or 12 pigs in a tissue submission, and including, meningeal swabs, whole heads I would send to the diagnostic lab, joint aspirates, cerebrospinal fluid, really the whole gamut. And through that, all of the isolates that we recovered, doing further sequencing or genotyping on those to really identify those virulence factors and find the right bug. And once we did that and got that into our vaccine and got that implemented in these herds, really saw very nice control. And really a night and day difference in prevalence of strep disease.
So tell me about when you picked out those pigs. There's some acute and chronic, going on in your herd. So which pigs work the best for those diagnostics?
I think I can say for any disease process, acute is always better, right? Untreated pigs, ideally. And strep is a very acute acting bug. So, it's not easy or it's not difficult to find these pigs that are very acutely neurologic or down and paddling. Those are really the ideal pigs.
So for our audience, strep is a systemic disease, right? So you might see the disease process in the brain or in the joints or systemically, right, as pneumonia. It's all throughout. So Steve, touch on kind of what you see on, you see a lot of diagnostics coming in from herds profiles across the U.S., right? So how do you differentiate, what's that going to be better, the meningeal, the joint, the lung? Tell us about that in your experience.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So most pigs have some amount of strep just as part of their normal flora and fauna. And one of the first steps is trying to sort that out, right? And so, for example, if we were to go out and sample tonsils or the nasal passages of a very healthy pig, it would not be uncommon for us to find some strep there. Now, we can do some additional diagnostics to understand the serotype that those isolates are. And, what we find is those are non-pathogenic serotypes generally. We are looking for the isolates to come out of tissues where strep doesn't belong, right? It doesn't belong in the brain. So these make really good samples. It doesn't belong in the joints if we're dealing with some lameness, right? So if we're seeing it in some of these kind of organs or these tissues, especially if they're systemic, that's usually one of the first clues to us that we're going down the right path there. So making sure to get those tissues sampled in these workups is really, really important. And it does take some effort. And as Dr. Seth mentioned, it's sometimes repeated samplings and being willing to go that extra mile on multiple submissions here.
It can become somewhat frustrating because you think you got the best one, and you look at the genetic profile and the history, and maybe in Dr. Krantz's situation, he tried a vaccine at first and it didn't work as well, and so that was a suspicion that he may not have had the right one. So it does take some tenacity, that's for sure. So Seth, jump into you have the vaccine, right? You got it manufactured. And so what are you thinking about in terms of timing, and how do you go about putting that in your herd now?
Again, because the problem was so significant and there wasn't really anything else to tackle in that particular situation, I was kind of willing to throw everything I had at it. And at the time, this would have been several years ago, there was some good data. Some other organizations had showing that either pre-farrowing to the sow provided some good protection, or just injecting those piglets also gave good protection. I really went the nuclear option and did both because to me it was that significant of a problem. So that's really where I went, implementing it both as a pre-farrow injection to our sows as well as a early injection in those pigs while they're still nursing.
Great. And what about the gilts? Did you do anything different with them?
Yeah, so the gilts would have benefited. Again, this would have been in a situation once we had the farm stocked and we weren't bringing in outside gilts. We were doing an internal multiplication for replacements. And then that farm was supplying all of our commercial herds. So those internal gilts were receiving that vaccine, both as a pig. The sow that she came from would have received it. And then we were also doing a pre-breeding injection with that as well.
Great. And so then going forward, things improved. Did you keep that same vaccination strategy or did you change it up?
Yeah, so that's one of the, I can't say I've done a lot of things that have been a real slam dunk in my career, but this is one of the things that I've been extremely happy with from a health control perspective. And one thing, at least when we were in this process of, trying to find the right isolates and, it takes some time to develop an autogenous vaccine. One of the things I went with was, a kind of a mass injection to our sows pre-farrow with an antibiotic. So we went with the ceftiofur kind of injection program. And I did see pretty nice control and, an improvement in downstream strep from doing that. But I really ultimately wanted to get away from that, from a judicious use of antibiotics and, cost and time and all the things that go into that situation. My preference was to get to a immune management or vaccine type program. So that was kind of a temporary Band-Aid just to help with the downstream issues we were having. But once we had the vaccine in place, pulled that antibiotic program out, and really saw even further improvement or lessening of strep downstream issues, and haven't had to go back to any kind of antibiotic program like that since. And I want to say my timeline's a little fuzzy, but probably at least 6 or 7 years into that same program. I do it for all of our farms, commercial, multipliers, everything. So every pig we market benefits from strep vaccine when they're born. So.
Great. And so what about the vaccination in the pigs? So the pigs get it as well as the sows and continued that?
Yeah, so I'm still doing it the same way. I have it in the pre-farrowing injection as well as those piglets.
All right. So let's jump into how often do you need to update that vaccine? So Steve, what do you see? What would your recommendations be in terms of, how do you know if Seth continues to have the right strain in his vaccine?
It's kind of a twofold approach in my mind. One is just that general observation of those pigs in that nursery period. How are they doing, right? Are we still seeing the control that we are interested in, and or are we starting to be worried that some neurologic signs are starting to slip back in? Trying to always balance that then, right? Occasionally there's going to be a pig here and there, right? This is more trying to ask that question in general, like over time, right? Are we happy enough, right? It's the one pig here and there that, we're thinking about, but oftentimes it's hard to make judgment calls just based on them. Those pigs, however, do make nice samples, right? And we can collect some tissues from them, get those sent into a lab, and they can be part of our surveillance program where we can be proactively monitoring what are the serotypes and are we seeing something new or different that's in the herd. Now, generally changes are going to come when there's a major shift in the production system, right? A change of gilt source, even a change of genetic suppliers is often where, changes in strep originate from. But sometimes, especially early on in the development of a strep vaccine program, we might start out with 1 or 2 isolates. And as we get better control of those serotypes, maybe a third one was actually there all along. And it just was a little harder to nail that one down until we had better control of the more aggressive ones, let's say. We generally try to let just our clinical presentation and diagnostics guide when is the right time to update those vaccines. And it's going to be a little bit different for everybody, right? So just as long as we keep that in mind, and at Vaxxinova, we're always willing to help and be part of figuring that out with you all.
Great. So Seth, step us through kind of how you do it in your herd. Any diagnostic surveillance, or do you just listen to the pig, as Dr. Steve said, and how are they doing? And that prompts you to either collect or not collect.
Yeah, so I think Steve really hit the nail on the head there. What in my experience, what I've seen, is there a consistent shift in clinical presentation? So a particular group of pigs here and there is not as concerning. And I think with any disease management situation, we always have to include evaluating the basics. Are we doing things right? Did we have, some kind of hiccup with ventilation or something like that? Are we double or triple stocking pigs that's really creating a nice challenge that's allowing something to flourish? So I think that's always important for any disease, but strep as well, to really check that box first. And then also evaluate, are there other co-infections? So if we've got PRRS in the mix, we really need to get on top of that PRRS situation first, primarily, because I think that can really muddy the waters. And when I've talked to friends and colleagues who are struggling, it's easy to say, well, the vaccine's not working and that's why these pigs are dying. But there could also be lots of other junk in the mix, for lack of a better word. So what we saw was, we didn't have this other stuff in the mix, but we did see a clinical shift. Probably I'd say about 2 years into, after we had really good control, all of a sudden here we go again and we're seeing clinical strep. Kind of repeat the same process of doing diagnostics. We get an isolate, but a single isolate is probably not enough, so let's do some more. And we actually found a third serotype that historically, and in talking to some other folks, is not typically a problem in their system, but for sure it was causing some problems in ours. So we now actually have 3 serotypes in our autogenous product that we're using. Got that one in the mix and really got back to baseline of really good control. And since then, I can't say that I've had to repeat that again in 6 or 7 years. So,
wow, that sounds like really great success. So one quick question I had, I want to jump back just a little bit and revisit that vaccination timing. So with some pathogens that we deal with in swine, there's something called maternal antibody interference, and we have to be very careful about the placement of vaccine between sows pre-farrow and piglets that are young, right? And so I'm sure some of our listeners have, different diseases are different. So can you just visit that just a little bit, just for clarification that, strep, your vaccination, doesn't take that into account, essentially?
Yeah, absolutely. This is, an issue that we do struggle with anytime we're vaccinating for anything, as you mentioned, Tara. One couple of the things that we do at Vaxxinova that we're proud of are some of the different ways that we formulate our vaccine, not only with the amount of antigens that we're putting in there, but with the adjuvants we use as well. And we've worked pretty hard over the last years to demonstrate efficacy in vaccinated pigs that were born from vaccinated sows. And we do this with disease challenge models. And we use that information to guide us on the best way to build a vaccine and put it into the bottle, so that you have the best outcomes in those herds. And so, yeah, those are some of the things that we've taken upon ourselves to work pretty hard on. Those aren't necessarily requirements that are laid out by the USDA when we do autogenous vaccines, but it's important to us. And it's important to, making sure that we're getting the best response out of the pigs, even in the face of maternal antibodies.
I'll just jump in and add a little bit. I think when I've talked to other folks about their strep challenges, you can certainly see different presentations. I know a lot of folks, battle strep more as a farrowing house problem, so suckling piglets will be showing clinical signs of strep. That was not my particular situation. So I think in that situation, you might really focus more heavily on that pre-farrow time frame and potentially even looking at a multi-dose program in that situation. And I guess I can't speak eloquently to the immunology of it, but I've really seen those strep vaccines in suckling piglets really provide good protection for that post-weaning period, even in the face of, I'm assuming, high maternal antibody transfer, because I know I'm giving it to that sow, so I know it's there. And I really, in my mind, and the way I look at it, I think of it a lot like some of our circovirus vaccines, right? We're routinely giving those to relatively young pigs. Completely different pathogen, but that works really well in the face of maternal antibodies from those cells. So all I know is that it works.
No, I think between you guys got it right. It's just something to consider, right? And Dr. Krantz, you're exactly right. If you're having nursery problems, certainly depending on where you're seeing that acute disease, you may have to go into the piglet vaccination. And so there are all different options, and that's the great thing about having some tools that work, but putting them in the right place is what it's all about. So we're rounding up our discussion on Strep suis and how to manage the infection in your herd with Dr. Seth Krantz and Steve Tousignant. If you have questions or comments for our guests or about our show, please send those through on your podcast listening platform. If you like listening to our show, please give us a thumbs up. And before we finalize our discussion, I just want our guests to have one more shot at rounding up our discussion, some take-homes from today. Seth?
Yeah, so I guess I would just say, I think it is possible to control this particular pathogen, and it can be very rewarding. It's not always easy and does certainly require some effort and some time and really choosing a good partner to really help you develop that tool. But certainly worth it.
Yeah, great. And Steve?
Boy, there isn't much that I can add there. I think summarized very nicely. And just, again, at Vaxxinova, we're happy to be part of helping figure this out in your herd and working with your herd veterinarians and, whatever we can do to support along the way here. That's what we're all about.
It's time for our famous three.
AB Vista, an innovative animal nutrition company offering intelligent solutions for the swine industry. The combination of innovative products, technical expertise, and cutting-edge services provide the ideal tools to drive pig production. To learn more about AB Vista tools, check abvista.com.
So before I let you go, a hallmark of our SwineNet podcast show is to ask our guests 3 questions just to get to know them a little bit better. So Seth, what's your favorite book or resource that you use in your area of expertise?
I don't know. I think anymore, Google is really a nice resource. Not necessarily information from Google, but I think really we've got the world of information at our fingertips. And I can't say I'm very often reaching for an actual text. I think Diseases of Swine is still a beautiful resource, but I'd be lying if I told you I'm cracking it open every day. So I guess really all the digital tools we have out there are typically my first stop.
I agree. And it makes sort of going through all the publications from, back in the old days, it makes it a lot easier, right? Some of the search engines are very powerful these days. Steve, how about you?
Yeah, I think, the diseases of swine for me is still one of the books in hand that I reach for, at least as a starting point. There's a lot of good information there, and, the reference and citation lists are usually quite complete, but I'm also not afraid to reach out to Google as well, or oftentimes for me, I use Google Scholar, which focuses more just on scientific publication and this kind of thing, which is kind of a nice starting point for me as well.
So, Seth, what about a favorite book or resource outside of VetMed? What's something that our listeners might be interested in?
Yeah, so I've actually got two. They're both by the same author. And I read these a couple of years ago, and I probably need to reread them. But there's an author, his name is Jonathan Haidt, and he's a psychologist. And two of my favorite books, one is The Happiness Hypothesis, and the other is The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. They're a little bit nerdy, and they're really deep dives into human psychology and human behavior. But I think they're fascinating, and I reference them a lot, and really changed my perspective on interacting with folks and conversations I have with people, and really understanding what's driving people's behavior. So I think they're great.
Yeah, interesting. Say the author's name one more time.
Jonathan Haidt.
Jonathan Haidt.
Haidt, I want to say, but okay. Don't quote me on that one.
Great. I think you and I had a conversation about one of those books before, and it was about my frustrations with biosecurity and people kind of following the direction, right, and the rules and how hard that is. So very interesting. I'll have to check it out. Steve, anything to add?
Yeah, one that I read, I've read it a couple of different times now. It's a really interesting book about leadership. It's called Turn the Ship Around. It's a dive into leadership through the eyes of a submarine captain. And it was brought to my attention by a mentor who's well known in the swine industry, Larry Firkins, as a good book on leadership and these kind of things. So interesting read, right? You learn a lot about how, like, in particular, the U.S. Navy works, as they use that as the model for leadership. And that's been a good one for me.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Turn the ship around. That's easy. All right. So the last question that I have is share with us an attribute or characteristic that you feel sets successful professionals apart from others.
I think there's a lot of them, but I guess, one is really just, a willingness to change your perspective, or really looking at all the opportunities that we face that frustrate us or disappoint us, and really using those as a way to improve ourselves, to improve our situations. I think it's very easy to get frustrated in any career, really, but there's lots of stuff in the pig business that's constantly changing and constantly frustrating, and we end up, really hitting a wall a lot of times. But I think those situations provide lots of good opportunities to think outside the box, think about situations differently, really trying to understand the root causes of situations that we're in, and really launching from that to get better.
Open-mindedness, maybe, is a word for that.
Yeah,
great.
Yeah.
Great. Steve?
I've said it on a couple of other podcasts that I've done with y'all, Tara, but it's this pursuit of lifelong learning. And it piggybacks on what Dr. Seth said as well. I mean, we all get to a point in our careers or our lives where maybe it feels like, it's the same stuff day in and day out, but, really use those as those opportunities to learn a new thing, right? So whether it's nutrition or ventilation or whatever it might be, right? Seth said the swine industry is full of new things to constantly learn. And so, that pursuit of lifelong learning to me is an important one.
Yeah, absolutely. And, all of these, that's kind of the point of these questions, right? It makes you think about maybe something else that you guys have done or are doing, or again, a leadership book or psychology book, right, that helps you both in your personal life as well as, your work life. So excellent. Well, thank you guys so much for being on my show today, and look forward to the next time.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.